Michael, a successful 38-year-old man, never imagined that an ordinary afternoon in Chicago's Millennium Park would change his life forever. Right before his eyes, a young woman was fighting to keep her dignity while the fountain water washes away more than just the dirt from the clothes. It washed away her pride, her hope, her held-back tears. But what he is about to do for this stranger and her little daughter was going to leave you speechless. Stay until the end, because this story will remind you that true kindness didn't need a spotlight. Michael had just come out of an exhausting meeting in downtown Chicago when he decided to take a shortcut through Millennium Park, looking to clear his head before heading back to the office. The afternoon sun was beating down with intensity on the sleek metal benches, and the murmur of the public fountains mixed with the laughter of children running among the pigeons. He loosened the knot of his tie, took a deep breath, and walked without haste, enjoying the contrast between the chaos of business and the simple peace of that place. He didn't have any plans beyond getting home, taking a shower, and checking his pending emails, but then something caught his attention from the other side of the park. A woman kneeling next to the main fountain scrubbing clothes with her hands while a little girl played with the stones beside her. The scene felt so out of place to him that he stopped dead in his tracks. It wasn't something you saw every day, someone using a public fountain as if it were a laundry sink. He stood there, watching from a distance, not quite understanding what had made him stop. The woman had brown hair tied back in a messy ponytail, and although her movements were firm as she washed each garment, there was something in her posture that gave away a deep exhaustion, one that didn't come from physical effort alone. Every so often, she would look up to check that the little girl was okay. And in those brief moments, Michael could see her face. Young, maybe 32 years old, with delicate features but marked by sleepless nights. The little one, about 7 years old, had long dark hair tied in 2 uneven braids and wore a simple outfit that had seen better days. The girl didn't seem ashamed of the situation. She was simply playing oblivious to the weight of what her mother was going through. But the mother definitely felt the weight of every gaze that passed by, of every whisper from the ladies crossing the park with their shopping bags. Michael noticed how Emily forced a smile every time Sophie looked at her, as if she wanted to protect her from the silent humiliation she herself was enduring. Something inside Michael stirred uncomfortably, as if someone had touched an old wound he thought was healed. He couldn't take his eyes off that woman, off the way she wrung out each garment with force, as if she were also wringing out her dignity just to get through one more day. He wondered what kind of circumstances drive someone to wash clothes in a public fountain in the middle of the city center. It wasn't extreme poverty. The clothes she was washing were modest but clean. The girl had shoes worn out perhaps, but they both looked well fed. It was something more recent, something that had happened to bring them to this point. Michael remembered the words of his mother, who had passed away 5 years ago. "My son, never judge someone you see on the ground because you don't know what knocked them down." He put his hands in his trouser pockets and made a decision that even he didn't fully understand in that moment. He walked toward them with calm steps, not rushing, trying not to appear threatening or invasive. When he was close enough, he cleared his throat softly so as not to startle them. Emily looked up immediately, startled, and her eyes showed that glint of alertness found in people who have learned to mistrust. Michael raised his hands in a gesture of peace and offered a sincere smile, one of those that start in the eyes and not just the mouth. "Good afternoon. Excuse me for approaching you like this, but is everything all right?" he asked with a calm voice, crouching down a bit to be at Sophie's eye level. The girl stopped playing with the stones and looked at him with curiosity, tilting her head the way children do when they're trying to figure out if someone is a friend or a threat. Emily swallowed hard, drying her wet hands on her pants before answering. "Yes, sir. Everything's fine, thank you," she said with a tone that tried to be firm but trembled slightly. Michael nodded slowly, but he didn't move from his spot. He could see in Emily's eyes that nothing was fine, that this automatic response was just a shield against other people's pity. "Forgive me for insisting," Michael continued this time, sitting on the edge of the fountain as if he had all the time in the world. "But I don't see someone washing clothes here every day, and I'm just curious. If you need help with anything, you can tell me. No need to be embarrassed." There was a long, uncomfortable silence where the only sounds were the falling water of the fountain and the distant noise of traffic. Sophie clung to her mother's arm, and Emily pursed her lips, fighting back the urge to cry or scream or just disappear. Finally, voice cracking but still dignified, she answered, "They cut our water at home, and the power too." So well, I don't have any other way to wash my daughter's school clothes. Michael felt something in his chest tighten, like he couldn't breathe. He didn't say anything for a moment, just nodded, respecting the courage it took to say that out loud. Evening was settling over Chicago, but for Michael, something had changed. He didn't know that this conversation by a public fountain would be the start of the most important story of his life. Emily kept her eyes fixed on the wet clothes she'd left on the fountain's edge, avoiding at all costs looking directly into the eyes of this man in a suit, who for some unexplainable reason was still sitting there without judging her. Michael, for his part, wasn't in any rush to leave either. There was something about this woman's honest vulnerability that kept him rooted to the spot, as if moving would be a betrayal of the fragile trust she'd just placed in him. Sophie broke the silence first with the brutal innocence only kids have, asking, "Are you rich, Mr. Michael?" Let out a soft laugh, surprised by her bluntness, and answered, "Let's just say I do okay, little one. Why do you ask?" The girl shrugged and pointed at Michael's watch. "Because my mommy says only people with money wear shiny watches." Emily closed her eyes, embarrassed, murmuring, "Sophie, oh my God," which sounded more like a plea than a scolding. Michael smiled tenderly, not offended at all, and looked at the girl with genuine interest. "Your mom is very observant, and so are you." There was a pause where Michael weighed his next words carefully, knowing that whatever he said now could make Emily shut down completely, or maybe trust him a little more. He decided to be direct, but gentle. "Look, ma'am, excuse me, I don't know your name." Emily looked at him briefly before answering in a low voice. "Emily, and she's Sophie." Michael nodded, etching those names into his memory like they were important. "Emily, I don't want to overstep, but if you don't mind me asking, how did you end up in this situation? Because it doesn't look like something that happened overnight." Emily clenched her jaw, and for a second Michael thought she was going to tell him to get lost, that it was none of his business to leave her alone. But instead, Emily let out a shaky sigh and started talking, like the words had been trapped for so long she couldn't hold them in anymore. "I used to work at a clothing store in the Wrigleyville neighborhood." Emily began without looking at him, focusing her attention on folding the wet clothes with nervous hands. It wasn't much, but it was enough to pay rent Sophie's school utilities. "We could eat every day. You know, we didn't have extra, but we didn't go without." Her voice got rougher as she went on. 2 months ago, my boss accused a coworker of stealing money from the register, but I knew it wasn't her, because I saw the owner's son take the cash myself to go party with his friends." Michael frowned, already imagining how this story ended. "And you told the truth?" he asked. Emily nodded bitterly. "Yeah, I stood up for my coworker in front of everyone. I told the owner his son was the one responsible, not her." She paused for a long time before adding with painful irony, "They fired me that same day. No severance, nothing. They said I was a liar and a troublemaker." The indignation Michael felt was immediate and visceral, like a punch to the gut. He knew that kind of injustice, he'd seen it plenty of times in the business world, but hearing it from someone who'd lost everything for doing the right thing, it filled him with a suppressed rage he had to swallow before speaking. "And since then, you haven't found another job?" he asked softly. Emily shook her head, looking over at Sophie now, who had gone back to playing with the stones, oblivious to the adults' conversation. "I've been everywhere, sir. Stores, restaurants, offices, houses, asking for work, doing anything, but everyone asks for references. And when they call my old boss, well, you can imagine what he says about me." Her voice cracked slightly. "Last month they cut the power. 3 days ago, the water. The landlord gave me until Friday to pay 3 months of back rent or he's evicting us." Michael felt his heart shrink with every word. "And you don't have any family who can help?" Michael asked, though something deep down already knew the answer. Emily let out a dry, humorless laugh and finally looked him in the eye for the first time with complete honesty. "Sophie's dad left when she was 1. My parents died in an accident when I was 20. I don't have brothers, I don't have uncles. I don't have anyone but my daughter." She wiped away a stubborn tear with the back of her hand. She took a deep breath and added with a firm voice, "But I don't need pity, sir. I just need someone to give me a chance to prove I'm a good worker, that I'm honest, that I'm worth it." Michael felt a lump in his throat, because those words reminded him so much of his mother that for a moment it was like hearing her all over again, begging for a chance the world didn't want to give her. He stood up slowly, put his hand in his jacket pocket and asked something he didn't even know why he was asking. "Do you like ice cream, Sophie?" The little girl lifted her head with shining eyes, and in that moment Michael knew he wasn't going to walk away from them without doing something about it. Sophie didn't need to be told twice. She jumped to her feet with a huge smile that lit up her dark little face, and without any shyness she grabbed Michael's hand like she'd known him her whole life. "I love ice cream, sir, but I haven't had one in a long time," the little girl confessed with that brutal honesty only children have, not knowing that every word was like a dagger straight to Michael's heart. Emily rushed to intervene, clearly embarrassed by the situation. "Sophie, don't bother the gentleman. He doesn't have to buy you anything," she said firmly, but not harshly, trying to hold on to the little pride she had left. Michael raised his hand in a calming gesture and shook his head. "It's no bother, really. Besides, it's hot, and I want one too." He looked at Emily with an expression that allowed no argument but wasn't bossy either. It was kind, almost pleading. "Please let me treat you. It's not charity, it's just ice cream between neighbors in the city." Emily hesitated, biting her lower lip while looking at her daughter, who was practically jumping with excitement. Finally, she nodded, lowering her gaze. "All right, thank you." The three of them walked toward the ice cream cart on the corner of the park where Old Joe, a man with a gray mustache and a white apron, had been selling classic handmade ice cream for 30 years. Sophie pressed her nose against the glass of the cart, eyeing all the flavors with huge eyes full of happy indecision. Vanilla, chocolate, strawberry, mint, chip, butter, pecan. "Which one do you want, little one?" Michael asked, crouching down to her height with his hands on his knees. "Can I get 2 flavors?" Sophie asked shyly, as if she were asking for something way too big. Michael let out a genuine laugh that even made Old Joe smile behind his cart. "You can even get 3 if you want." Sophie's eyes grew as wide as plates. "Really?" Michael nodded, and the girl ordered enthusiastically, "Then I want strawberry chocolate and mint chip, please." Old Joe prepared the cone with the skill of years, scooping 3 perfect, colorful balls that looked like a little tower of happiness. Emily ordered just a vanilla one, the cheapest, and Michael asked for a butter pecan one. While Old Joe was preparing the ice creams, Michael paid with a large bill and told the gentleman to keep the change, a gesture Old Joe appreciated with a nod and a sincere, "God bless you, young man." They walked slowly back toward the fountain where Emily's wet laundry was, and Michael suggested they sit for a while on the edge while they enjoyed their ice creams before they melted in the heat. Sophie sat between the 2 adults, swinging her legs in the air as she attacked her cone with absolute dedication, getting pink and brown cream all over her nose and cheeks. Michael watched her out of the corner of his eye with a smile he couldn't hold back because there was something in that girl's pure joy that reminded him how simple happiness could be when you don't overcomplicate it. Emily ate her ice cream in silence with small, slow bites, as if she wanted to make it last as long as possible. And Michael noticed her eyes were glassy, even though she tried to hide it. "Is it good?" Michael asked, breaking the silence. Emily nodded without looking at him much. "I haven't had ice cream in months." There was something in the way she said it. No drama, no self-pity, just a simple fact that made Michael feel a mix of sadness and admiration for this woman's strength. He realized that Emily wasn't looking for pity or handouts, she was just trying to survive day by day with the little she had, protecting her daughter from the harshness of their reality. "Hey, Emily," Michael said after a while, wiping his hands with a napkin Old Joe had given them. "Would you let me drive you home? I don't like the idea of you carrying wet clothes on foot, and it's going to get dark soon." Emily looked at him with surprise and a bit of instinctive mistrust because in her experience, good deeds from strangers always came with a hidden price. "I don't want to take advantage of your kindness, sir. You've already done too much with the ice creams," she replied politely but firmly. Michael understood that distrust perfectly and wasn't offended in the slightest. "It's no trouble, Emily. It's just that my car is parked right nearby, and honestly, it's no effort at all." He paused and added with sincerity, "Besides, if I'm being honest, I'd rest easier knowing you got home safe." Sophie, who had finished her ice cream and was now licking her sticky fingers, chimed in enthusiastically. "Mommy say yes, I've never been in a fancy car before." Emily sighed, looking at the wet clothes she'd have to carry, then at her excited daughter, and finally at this man in a suit who for some inexplicable reason had decided to be kind to 2 strangers. "Okay," she finally accepted, but only to the door. Michael helped Emily put the wet clothes into a plastic bag she had with her, and they walked together toward where his car was parked. A black SUV, modern but not flashy, the kind used by successful but discreet businessmen. Sophie let out a "wow" when Michael unlocked the doors with the remote control, and the girl climbed into the back seat with the excitement of someone discovering buried treasure. Emily got into the passenger seat with careful movements as if afraid of dirtying something with her damp clothes, and placed the bag of laundry at her feet. Michael started the engine and asked naturally, "Where are we headed?" Emily gave him the address of a working-class neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, a place where houses are small, streets are narrow, and people work hard just to make ends meet. The trip took 20 minutes, during which Sophie didn't stop asking questions. Did the car have a heater? Could she play music? Did Michael live in a big house? Michael answered every question with patience and good humor, while Emily constantly apologized for her daughter's interruptions. "Don't worry about it," Michael said each time. "I like that she's curious. Curious kids go far in life." When they arrived in front of a 3-story building with peeling paint and rusted window bars, Emily pointed shyly, "Here. Apartment 203. And what Michael saw when they went up those stairs changed his life forever. Michael insisted on helping carry the bag of wet clothes up to the apartment, and although Emily protested weakly, saying it wasn't necessary, he had already grabbed the bag and started climbing the stairs behind Sophie, who was hopping up step by step with energy renewed by the ice cream. The stairs creaked under their feet. The paint on the walls was chipped in several places, and there was a smell of dampness mixed with fried food coming from the other apartments. When they reached the second floor, Emily took a key from her pocket and opened a wooden door that had once been blue but was now an undefined color somewhere between gray and sky blue. "Come in, but please excuse the mess," Emily said, the shame evident in her voice. Although Michael noticed there was no mess at all. Everything was clean and tidy, there was simply very little of it. The apartment was small, maybe 40 square meters in total, with a living room that also served as a dining room, a tiny kitchen visible from the entrance, and a door at the back that probably led to the only bedroom. Michael entered slowly, observing everything with discretion. There was an old but clean armchair, a plastic table with 2 mismatched chairs, a small TV sitting on a wooden crate, and on the walls some drawings Sophie had clearly made with crayons. What impacted Michael the most wasn't the poverty of the place, but the dignity with which it was kept. There wasn't a dirty dish, no clothes thrown on the floor, no trash piled up. Every object, no matter how humble, was in its place. And Michael understood immediately that Emily was a woman who refused to lose her dignity no matter how much life took from her. Sophie ran toward her room shouting, "I'm going to put away my treasures from the park," leaving the 2 adults alone in the living room. Michael set the bag of clothes near the door and stood there not quite knowing what to say, because any word that came to mind sounded condescending or insufficient. Emily crossed her arms over her chest in a defensive gesture, biting her lip as she looked around her own home with eyes that mixed shame and resignation. "I know it's not much," she murmured, "but it's what I can give my daughter." Michael shook his head immediately. "I didn't say anything, Emily, and I wasn't thinking anything bad," he clarified gently. "I was just thinking that this place is cleaner than my office." He tried to lighten the mood with that joke, but Emily barely sketched a sad smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for everything, sir," Emily said, after an awkward silence, walking toward the door in a clear signal that it was time for Michael to leave. "Honestly, I don't know how to thank you for the ice cream, the ride. Everything." Michael nodded, taking the hint, but something inside him didn't want to leave just yet. Something he couldn't quite explain with words. It wasn't pity, it wasn't sorrow. It was something deeper, like an inexplicable connection to this woman's pain, which mirrored so much of the pain his own mother had lived through years ago. "You have nothing to thank me for, Emily." "It was a pleasure meeting you both," he replied with absolute sincerity. He pulled a simple business card with his name and phone number from the inner pocket of his jacket and held it out to Emily. "If you ever need help with anything at all, don't hesitate to call me. Seriously." Emily took the card with trembling fingers, staring at it like it was some alien object, and read aloud quietly. "Michael Thompson, business consultant." She looked up at him with a confused expression. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Michael smiled sadly and answered something he didn't even know he was going to say until the words left his mouth. "Because someone did the same thing for my mother many years ago. Thanks to that, I was able to study and get ahead, and she made me promise that if I could ever help someone else, I would." Sophie ran out of her room just then, hiding something behind her back. "Mr. Michael, wait!" the little girl shouted urgently. She planted herself in front of him and held out her little hands, offering a crumpled drawing made with colored crayons, 3 stick figures holding hands under a huge yellow sun. "So, you won't forget us?" Sophie said with the seriousness of an adult. Michael felt a lump in his throat so tight he could barely breathe. He had to crouch down to be at the little girl's eye level, taking the drawing with both hands as if it were the most valuable treasure in the world. "I will never forget you two, Sophie. I promise you," he said, his voice husky with held-back emotion. The little girl smiled with satisfaction and without warning hugged him tightly, burying her little face in Michael's neck. He closed his eyes and returned the hug carefully, like someone holding something fragile and precious. Emily watched the scene with eyes full of tears she wouldn't allow herself to shed because she knew if she started crying she wouldn't be able to stop. When Michael stood up, he carefully tucked the drawing into the inner pocket of his jacket right where the business card had been, and walked out of the apartment without saying another word because words just weren't enough anymore. He went down the stairs slowly, with heavy steps that dragged all the emotional weight of what he had just experienced. And when he got to his SUV, he just sat there in the driver's seat with his hands on the wheel, not starting the engine, processing everything. He looked up toward the window of apartment 203 and saw the curtain move slightly. It was Sophie, waving her little hand to say goodbye with a smile that still shined from a distance. Michael raised his hand and waved back, feeling something inside him break and rebuild itself at the same time, as if that little girl and that woman had opened a door in his heart that had been padlocked shut for years. He started the engine, but before driving off he took out his phone and noted down the exact address of the building, the apartment number, and their full names, Emily and Sophie. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do with that information. He didn't have a clear plan in his mind. He only had an absolute deep certainty coursing through his entire body like an electric current. His life had just changed, and theirs had too, even if they didn't know it yet. As he drove back to his house in the most exclusive part of Chicago, Michael couldn't get the image out of his head. Emily washing clothes in the fountain, Sophie smiling with ice cream on her face, that apartment almost empty but full of love and dignity. And that night, Michael didn't sleep because he was designing a plan that would change 3 lives forever. Emily woke up to the sound of male voices outside her apartment, followed by banging on the door that made her jump out of bed with a racing heart, and that instinctive fear of someone living on the edge of an economic abyss waiting for the final blow. She looked at the clock on the wall. It was barely 7 in the morning, too early for the landlord to come threaten her with eviction. She put a ragged robe over her pajamas and walked barefoot to the door, peeking through the peephole first before opening it. On the other side were 2 men in blue uniforms she didn't recognize. One was carrying a toolbox and the other was checking a clipboard with a professional look. She opened the door just a crack, keeping her body tense and her voice steady even though she was trembling inside. "Yes, can I help you?" she asked with the mistrust of someone who has learned that surprises are rarely good. The man with the clipboard smiled kindly and replied, "Good morning, ma'am. We're from the electric company and the water utility. We were sent to reconnect your services." Emily blinked several times, trying to process words that made absolutely no sense in her reality. "Sorry, come again," the man repeated patiently. "Your electricity and water services. We're here to reconnect them this morning." Emily felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "There must be a mistake," Emily said, her voice trembling as she clutched the doorframe to keep her balance. "I didn't pay anything. I don't have the money. It's impossible that—" But the man with the clipboard shook his head and pointed at something on his papers. "No mistake, Mrs. Davis. Apartment 203. Someone paid your debt in full yesterday afternoon at our main office. We have the reconnection order signed and sealed. May we come in to do the work?" Emily stood there mute, her mind trying to process information that seemed ripped from an impossible dream. Someone had paid her debt. Who, why, how? The questions crashed into each other in her head without finding any logical answers. Sophie appeared behind her, still in her pajamas with messy hair, rubbing her eyes with her fists. "Mommy, who are they?" the little girl asked with a sleepy voice. Emily didn't know what to answer, so she simply stepped aside and let the technicians pass. They started working with professional efficiency, checking the electric meter, connecting cables, and adjusting water valves. Everything was happening too fast, as if reality had accelerated without asking her permission. While the technicians worked, Emily sat on the old armchair with Sophie curled up beside her, watching everything with a mix of disbelief and fear, as if at any moment someone would appear and tell her it was all a cruel joke. They took less than an hour to finish, and when the technician with the clipboard handed her a copy of the reconnection order, Emily read the document over and over, looking for some detail that would give her a clue as to who it had been. But it only said, "Payment made in cash by a third party. Services reconnected by administrative order." She signed the paper with shaking hands, and when the technicians left, Emily sat there in the middle of her living room staring at the lights that now worked, listening to the sound of water running in the kitchen tap and feeling completely lost. Sophie ran to the bathroom shouting excitedly, "Mommy, we can take a warm bath now." But Emily could barely celebrate because she didn't understand what was happening. She got up like she was on autopilot. She walked to the payphone on the corner because her cell phone had been out of credit for days and called the building's landlord. "Mr. Ramirez!" A 60-year-old man with the raspy voice of a smoker answered on the third ring. "Hello," he said with a dry tone. "Mr. Ramirez, it's Emily Davis from 203. Emily began, her voice choked by the anxiety tightening her chest. "Sorry to bother you so early, but I need to ask you something very important." There was a silence on the other end before Mr. Ramirez replied with a softer tone than usual. "Oh, Mrs. Emily, I was actually going to look for you today to talk to you." Emily felt her blood run cold. "Did something bad happen?" she asked with a threat of a voice. Mr. Ramirez let out a surprised laugh. "Bad? Quite the opposite, my dear. Yesterday afternoon, a gentleman came by, very well dressed in an elegant suit with fine manners, asking about you. I told him you owed me 3 months of rent and that you had until Friday to pay or I was going to evict you. And do you know what that man did?" Emily couldn't breathe. "What did he do?" she whispered. "He took out his wallet and paid me the 3 full months right there in cash without arguing the price or asking for a discount. He told me it was important that you and your girl had a safe roof over your heads. Something like that has never happened to me in 30 years of renting apartments." Emily felt her legs fail her and had to lean against the wall of the payphone booth so she wouldn't fall. Mr. Ramirez continued, "So you can rest easy, Mrs. Emily. You have 3 months paid in advance, and I won't bother you anymore." When she hung up the phone, Emily walked back to her apartment with slow, unsure steps, as if she were floating between reality and an impossible dream. She went up the stairs, holding onto the rusty railing. She entered her home where Sophie was playing happily with her dolls in the living room, now lit by electric light, and she let herself fall onto the armchair with her head in her hands. It couldn't be a coincidence. The services reconnected the rent, paid all in less than 24 hours after meeting that man in the park. Michael, that was his name? Michael Thompson. Emily searched desperately in her pants pockets until she found the crumpled business card he had given her yesterday. She held it between her trembling fingers, looking at the phone number printed in black letters, debating between overwhelming gratitude and the crushing shame of having received so much help from a stranger. How could she possibly thank him for something like this? How could she look him in the eye, knowing he'd paid off her debts when she couldn't even buy her own daughter an ice cream? She pressed the card against her chest and finally let the tears fall. Tears of relief, of shame, of gratitude, of confusion, all mixed into a salty river that soaked her face. Sophie saw her crying and ran to hug her. "What's wrong, Mommy? Why are you crying?" Emily squeezed her tight and whispered, "I'm crying because a miracle happened, my love." Just then, the doorbell rang. When Emily opened it, eyes puffy from tears there, he was. Michael was standing in the doorway, hands in his pockets. Dressed way more casually than yesterday, dark jeans, a white cotton shirt, and comfortable shoes, as if he'd decided to leave the business world outside for a day. His expression was calm, but there was a hint of nervousness in the way he shifted his weight from one foot to the other, like he wasn't quite sure how he'd be received after what he'd done. Emily looked at him from the other side of the door, eyes still red and swollen from crying, her robe wrinkled and hair messy. And for a moment neither of them said a thing. They just stared at each other in a silence loaded with emotions neither knew how to put into words. It was Sophie who broke the tension with a squeal of joy that echoed through the building's hallway. It's the ice cream man, Mommy! It's the ice cream man!" She ran toward Michael without holding back, throwing herself into his arms with that absolute trust only kids have when they spot a good person. Michael caught her with a surprised laugh and lifted her into the air, making Sophie let out a crystal-clear giggle that sounded like music amidst the heavy emotions of the moment. Emily watched the scene with a tight chest, seeing how her daughter hugged this man with an affection she usually saved only for her. When Michael put Sophie back down, the little girl grabbed his hand and pulled him inside the apartment without waiting for permission. "Come on, Mr. Michael, I gotta show you my new drawings," she announced eagerly, dragging him toward her room. Michael looked at Emily silently, asking for permission. She nodded slowly, stepping aside to let him in, even though her mind was a whirlwind of unanswered questions. She closed the door behind him and just stood there, not knowing what to do with her hands, her body, or the crushing weight of gratitude sitting on her chest. Michael gently let go of Sophie and said warmly, "I'll see your drawings in a bit, sweetie, but first I need to talk to your mommy. Is that okay?" Sophie nodded with an understanding smile that looked way too mature for her 7 years, then ran to her room, leaving them alone. Michael turned to Emily, and before he could say anything, she spoke up. Her voice was shaky but firm, loaded with an impossible mix of shame and gratitude. "You paid my electricity, my water, my rent. Why did you do that? You don't even know me." The words came out tumbling over each other, mixed with held-back sobs that threatened to break loose any second. Michael took a deep breath, searching for the right words, ones that could explain something even he didn't fully understand himself. He stepped a little closer to Emily but kept a respectful distance, aware she probably felt vulnerable and invaded by so much unexpected help. "You're right. I don't know you." Michael started, his voice soft but steady. "But yesterday when I saw you two at the fountain, when I heard your story, when I saw how you take care of your daughter with so much love despite everything, something inside me shifted." He paused, digging through his memories for the exact words his mother had told him so many years ago. "You see, Emily, I didn't always have money. I didn't even have a comfortable life. I grew up in a neighborhood a lot like this one with my mom. She worked cleaning other people's houses so I could eat and go to school." Emily was looking at him with full attention now, her tears stopped by the surprise of this confession. Michael went on. "She used to wash other families' clothes in our house because we didn't have a washing machine. I saw her cry in silence so many times when she thought I was asleep, wondering how she'd pay the rent or buy my school supplies." His voice cracked a little as he remembered. "It was just her and me against the world since my dad left us when I was 5. When I was 14, Michael continued, now with glassy eyes staring at some undefined point in the past, a wealthy man from the city saw my mom asking for work outside a supermarket. She was holding a sign that read, 'I clean houses, I cook, I babysit any honest work.' That man, his name was Mr. Albert, stopped to talk to her, listened to her, and gave her a job in his home as a housekeeper with a decent wage." Michael smiled sadly at the memory. "But that wasn't all. When he found out I was good in school, he offered to pay for my entire education all the way through college. Thanks to him, I could study business administration. Thanks to him, I was able to build my own business. Thanks to him, I could give my mom a home of her own before she passed away." He wiped away a stray tear that escaped from his right eye. "Before he died, Mr. Albert made me promise something, that when I had the means, I'd help someone else in the same way. He told me, 'Michael, true wealth isn't measured by what you hoard, but by what you share with those in need.' And I promised him I would." He looked Emily straight in the eyes with an intensity that took her breath away. "Yesterday, when I saw you two, I knew that moment had arrived." Emily couldn't hold it back anymore. She broke down, sobbing, covering her face with both hands, crying with the emotional weight of days, weeks, and months of pent-up struggle. Michael didn't try to touch her or comfort her physically because he understood she needed this release. She had been holding back those tears for too long, trying to stay strong for her daughter. He just stayed there, present, waiting patiently until Emily could catch her breath again. When she finally lifted her face, her eyes were red, but there was something different in them, a light of hope that hadn't been there yesterday. "I don't know how I'm going to repay you for all this," Emily whispered, her voice hoarse. "I don't have money. I don't have a job. I have nothing to offer you in exchange for your generosity. Michael shook his head firmly. "I don't want you to pay me anything, Emily. I didn't do this expecting something in return. I did it because it was the right thing to do, because I could, and because you two deserve a chance to breathe without the weight of the world on your shoulders." He paused and added with absolute sincerity, "Besides, you already gave me something very valuable yesterday." Emily looked at him confused. "What?" Michael smiled tenderly. "You reminded me why I work so hard, why I push myself every day. You reminded me that success means nothing if you can't share it with someone who needs it. So, really, I should be thanking you." Sophie ran out of her room with a new drawing in her hands. It showed 3 figures, a woman, a little girl, and a tall man all smiling under a brightly colored rainbow. "Look, Mr. Michael, I drew us all together like a family," announced the little girl with brutal innocence, not knowing the impact those words would have on the 2 adults. Emily blushed deeply, and Michael felt a warmth spread through his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time, the feeling of belonging to something bigger than himself. He took the drawing carefully and studied it with genuine attention, noticing every detail Sophie had added with love. "This is the most beautiful drawing I've ever seen in my life." Michael said, his voice emotional, and he wasn't lying. Sophie beamed with pride. Emily watched the interaction, her heart torn between immense gratitude and the fear of getting used to this kindness. The fear that her daughter would get too attached to someone who would eventually have to leave because fairy tales don't exist in real life. But Michael, as if he could read her thoughts, knelt down in front of Sophie and told her seriously, "You know what, Sophie? I think you and your mom deserve all the good things in the world, and I'm going to do everything I can to help you both." He looked up at Emily, seeking her approval, and in that moment, without either of them knowing it yet, a story was beginning that would change their lives forever. Michael slowly stood up, letting Sophie run back to her room to keep drawing, and he remained there standing in front of Emily in the middle of that small living room that suddenly seemed full of possibilities neither of them had imagined. 24 hours ago. Emily wiped the last tears away with the back of her hand, trying to regain some composure, but her voice still trembled when she spoke. "I don't understand why you chose us. There must be thousands of people in Chicago who need help just as much or more than I do." Michael nodded slowly, acknowledging the validity of that question, and walked toward the window, looking out at the bustle of the working-class neighborhood. Kids playing in the street. Women hanging clothes on lines. Street vendors shouting out their wares with voices mingling in a chaotic symphony of daily survival. He stared out for a long moment, gathering his thoughts before answering. "You're right. There are thousands of people who need help," Michael admitted without turning to look at her yet. "But when I saw you yesterday at that fountain washing clothes by hand while your daughter played by your side without complaining, without being ashamed of her situation, just being a happy little girl despite everything, I saw my mom. I saw her strength, her dignity, her unconditional love." He finally turned to look right at her, and I knew that if I didn't do something, I'd be betraying myself and the promise I made to Mr. Albert before he died. Emily listened to every word with absolute attention, absorbing not just what Michael was saying, but what he wasn't saying, too. The survivor's guilt, the weight of inherited gratitude, the human need to find closure for things left unfinished. "My mom's name was Rose," Michael continued, his voice softer now, letting himself get carried away by memories he rarely shared with anyone. "She was a short woman with rough hands and a huge heart. She worked her whole life in jobs most people don't even consider dignified. Cleaning other people's bathrooms, washing strangers' clothes, mopping office floors in the freezing cold early mornings. And what was it all for? So that I, her son, could have something better." His voice cracked slightly, but he went on. "When Mr. Albert gave her that steady job at his house, she cried tears of joy for hours. She cried because she could finally sleep easy knowing there was food on the table for me, that we could pay the rent without stressing, that I could keep studying." Michael sat down on one of the plastic chairs at the table, gesturing for Emily to sit too. She did, still processing every word as if she were piecing together an emotional puzzle. "Mr. Albert didn't just give my mom a job, Emily, he gave her dignity. He gave her hope. He gave her a future for me that she never thought was possible. When I started college," Michael went on now, resting his elbows on the table with his hands clasped in front of him, "my mom would sit in the kitchen at Mr. Albert's house every night to check my homework even though she could barely read properly. She'd ask me about what I was learning. She'd nod, even if she didn't understand half of it, but her pride was so big it lit up the whole room. A sad smile crossed his face. She graduated with me even if she didn't officially get the degree. Every title I earned was hers too, because without her sacrifice, none of it would have been possible. Emily felt fresh tears forming in her eyes because that story resonated deeply with her own experience as a single mother fighting against the world to give her daughter something better. When I finished my degree and got my first well-paid job, the first thing I did was buy a small house, but her own house for my mom. I tear up when I remember her face that day. Emily, she cried so hard I thought she was going to have a heart attack. She hugged me and said, "My son, I can die in peace now knowing that every tear, every early morning, every humiliation was worth it." And I told her I wasn't going to let her die, that we were just starting to live the good life. His voice faded almost to a whisper. But life had other plans. Michael fell silent for a moment, lost in painful memories. And Emily respected that silence without interrupting, understanding that there were wounds that still bled beneath the calm surface Michael showed the world. When he spoke again, his voice was huskier, loaded with an old sadness that was still very present. "My mom died 5 years ago from a massive heart attack. She was only 56, but her body was exhausted from so much hard work, from so much worry piled up over decades." He wiped his eyes quickly as if tears were a weakness he had to hide. "She died in her own bed in her own house, surrounded by dignity. And even though it hurt losing her so soon, it comforts me to know her last years were peaceful, that she could rest, that she got to see her sacrifice wasn't in vain." He looked at Emily intensely. "Before she died, she made me promise 2 things. That I'd never forget where I came from, and that if I ever had the chance to help someone like Mr. Albert helped us, I'd do it without hesitation." Michael extended his hand across the table without touching Emily, but leaving it there like a bridge between them. "So when I saw you two yesterday, it wasn't a coincidence or pity. It was the universe putting me in front of the chance to keep that promise. And there's nothing in this world that makes me happier than honoring my mother's memory by helping someone who reminds me so much of her." Emily wasn't even trying to hold back the tears running freely down her cheeks anymore, because Michael's words had touched something deep in her soul. It's the place where we keep our biggest fears and our most fragile hopes. She reached out her trembling hand and placed it over Michael's, a small gesture but loaded with meaning, with gratitude, with human connection in its purest form. "I don't know what to say," whispered Emily, her voice cracking. "I don't have enough words to thank you for what you've done for us. You're an angel that God put in our path when we needed it most." Michael turned his hand to hold hers gently, a warm touch that wasn't romantic, but deeply human. 2 people recognizing each other in their pain and in their hope. "I'm no angel, Emily. I'm just someone who understands what it's like to be on the edge of the abyss and be afraid of falling." He took a deep breath before speaking again, knowing what he was about to propose could change everything. "And that's why I want to offer you something more than just temporary money. I want to offer you a real chance to rebuild your life." Emily looked at him confused, not understanding where he was going with this. Michael continued, his voice firm but kind. "I want to offer you a job at my house." And those words floated in the air like seeds of a future neither of them could predict just yet. Emily slowly pulled her hand back, not because she wanted to break the connection, but because she needed to process what she'd just heard without physical distractions, without the warmth of another person clouding her ability to think clearly. She leaned back against the back of the plastic chair, looking at Michael with a mix of confusion, hope, and fear tangled in her expression. "A job. At your house," she repeated with a voice full of disbelief, as if the words were in a foreign language she had to translate twice just to understand. Michael nodded calmly, waiting patiently for her to process the information before he continued explaining. "What kind of job?" Emily finally asked, caution evident in her tone, because life had taught her that offers sounding too good to be true usually were. Michael shifted in his chair, searching for the right words to explain his proposal without it sounding like disguised charity, or worse, something inappropriate that might alarm her. "I need a housekeeper, someone to keep the house in order, cook meals, oversee that everything runs smoothly," he explained with a professional yet warm voice. "It's a big house, too big for just me." And even though I have a lady who comes twice a week for deep cleaning, I need someone who lives there. Someone present to breathe life into that place, which right now is just an empty building where I sleep. Emily listened with her heart racing, trying to find the trap hidden in that proposal. Because in her experience, nothing came without a hidden price, especially coming from men with money offering opportunities to desperate women. "Live there?" she asked, her voice tense, and Michael noticed the mistrust in her eyes immediately. He hurried to clarify before she could draw the wrong conclusions. "Yes, live there, but not in the way you're probably thinking," he said firmly, but without sounding offended by Emily's natural suspicion. "The house has 5 bedrooms. I use 1. You and Sophie would have the master suite on the 2nd floor with your own bathroom and plenty of space for both of you. You'd be completely separate from my private area." He paused to let that information settle before continuing. "The job would be Monday to Friday. Normal hours, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Weekends would be completely yours to do whatever you want. The salary would be $3,000 a month plus legal benefits plus food and utility costs, which would obviously be covered since you'd be living there." Emily's eyes went wide upon hearing the figure. It was double what she earned at her old job. $3,000? She repeated, disbelieving. "A month?" Michael nodded as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "I can't accept that," Emily said automatically, that defensive reflex of someone who's learned to protect herself by rejecting help before it turns into an emotional debt she can't pay. "It's too much, Michael. You've already done enough paying my debts. I can't let you give me a job you probably don't even need just because you feel sorry for us." Her voice sounded firm, but Michael could see the trembling in her hands, the internal struggle between pride and desperate need. Michael leaned forward, holding Emily's gaze with intensity but no aggression. "Listen to me closely, Emily, because I'm only going to say this once and I need you to believe it. I'm not doing this out of pity. I'm doing it because I genuinely need someone I trust in my house and because I see in you a hard-working, honest, responsible, and strong woman. I see someone who'd rather wash clothes in a public fountain than steal or do something dishonest. I see someone who lost her job for defending a coworker who was wrongly accused. That tells me you have values that aren't sold for convenience." His voice softened. "And yes, I also do it because I want to help. But not because I think you're incapable, because I think you deserve a chance to show everything you can do when you're not fighting just to survive every single day." Emily felt her resistance was crumbling bit by bit under the weight of Michael's sincerity. "Think about it this way." Michael continued, changing his strategy when he saw Emily was still hesitating. "I work long hours every day. I leave my house at 6 in the morning and come back at 9 or 10 at night, sometimes later. When I get home, the house is dark, cold, lifeless. I eat whatever quick thing I find in the fridge, usually something unhealthy, and go to sleep just to repeat the cycle the next day." There was a genuine sadness in his voice. "I don't have any family now, Emily. My grandparents died years ago. I have no siblings, no close aunts or uncles. Since my mom died, I've been living in a solitude that hurts more than I admit. This big, beautiful house isn't a home. It's just a place where I keep my stuff and rest my body." He looked at her with a vulnerability he hadn't shown before. "So yes, I need a housekeeper, but more than that, I need someone to bring life back to this space. I need to hear children laughing. I need to come home and smell homemade food. I need to feel like someone is waiting for me, even if it's just to ask me how my day was." He paused, surprised by his own honesty. "So you wouldn't be doing me a favor by accepting we'd be helping each other?" Emily felt something melt inside her chest, that protective shell she had built so carefully during years of lonely struggle. She looked toward the room where Sophie was still, humming a song she had learned at school, completely oblivious to the conversation. That was defining her future. She thought about all the days she had to tell her daughter they couldn't buy this or that, all the nights she had cried in silence wondering how she was going to pay the rent for the next month, all the moments she felt she was failing her as a mother because she couldn't give her anything more than love and mac and cheese. And now, standing in front of her was a man offering her not just a job, but a chance to give Sophie a better life, to live in a safe house, to not have to worry about utilities being cut off or imminent evictions. "Do you really think I can do it?" Emily asked in a small, vulnerable voice, showing for the first time the scared little girl living inside the strong woman. Michael smiled with genuine warmth. "I don't just think you can do it, Emily. I'm sure you'll do it better than anyone." He stood up and held out his hand to her, not to close a business deal, but to seal a pact of mutual trust. "What do you say? Shall we give this a shot?" Emily looked at that outstretched hand for a long moment, feeling the weight of the decision, and finally took it firmly. "Yes," she whispered. "Accept." And in that handshake, two broken lives began to heal together. The days that followed were a whirlwind of changes that Emily could barely process. Packing the few belongings they had into cardboard boxes, saying goodbye to the neighbors who had been her only friends in that neighborhood, explaining to Sophie that they were moving to a big house with a garden and a pool, without the little girl being able to believe such sudden luck. Michael helped them. With everything arriving in his SUV, to transport their things, buying what they were missing without Emily asking for a thing, organizing every detail with an efficiency that only someone used to managing complex businesses could have. When they finally arrived at Michael's residence located in an exclusive area of Chicago, where the houses had high gates and perfectly manicured gardens, Sophie stood there with her mouth open staring at this palace that would now be her home. The house was modern but cozy, 2 stories high with large windows that let in natural light. Light wood floors, elegant yet comfortable furniture, and a back garden with a pool that shimmered under the afternoon sun. "Welcome to your new home," Michael said, opening the front door with a smile that lit up his usually serious face. Emily entered slowly, feeling like she was walking inside a dream she would wake up from at any moment, but Sophie's hand squeezing hers reminded her that this was real, incredibly real. Michael showed them every corner of the house, especially the room that would be theirs, spacious, bright, with a king-size bed, a private bathroom with a bathtub, a closet the size of her entire old apartment, and a window overlooking the garden where Sophie was already imagining playing. "It's too much," Emily murmured with tears in her eyes. Michael shook his head. "It's exactly what you deserve." And the following months were full of adaptation discovery and constant surprises. Emily dedicated herself to her work with a passion and dedication that exceeded all of Michael's expectations. The house that was once a cold and silent space was transformed into a home full of life. Smells of homemade food that greeted Michael when he arrived tired from work, fresh flowers in the vases, curtains open, letting the light pour in soft music floating from the kitchen where Emily was preparing the recipes her mother had taught her with added twists like Chicago-style deep dish pizza nights. Sophie bloomed like a plant finally getting water after a long drought. Her laughter filled the hallways, her drawings decorated the fridge, and her stories from school livened up the dinners the 3 of them now shared together at the dining table. Michael found that he came home with more eagerness that his days had a purpose beyond work, and that the simple conversations with Emily about the weather or the daily news filled a void he didn't even know he had. One night, while they were eating burgers that Emily had made with love, Sophie suddenly blurted out, "Mr. Michael, can I ask you for something really big?" Michael put down his half-eaten burger and nodded with curiosity. "Of course, sweetie. What do you need?" Sophie took a deep breath as if gathering courage and said with a shaky but determined voice, "I want to learn how to sing. I want to be a singer when I grow up." Her eyes sparkled with a dream so pure that it made Michael feel something tighten in his chest. And what Michael did next proved to Emily that this man didn't just keep promises, he created miracles. Michael didn't hesitate for a second before answering Sophie's request. The very next day, he started researching the best music schools in Chicago. He contacted recommended teachers and visited prestigious academies that taught singing and vocal technique to children. A week later, while Emily was making breakfast in the kitchen, humming an old song from her youth, Michael came down the stairs with a mysterious smile that immediately caught both of their attention. "Sophie, come here a moment," Michael called out in an excited tone. The little girl left her cereal half-finished and ran toward him, curiosity shining in her dark eyes. Michael knelt down to get to her level and handed her a white envelope he had been keeping in his shirt pocket. "Open it," he said softly. Sophie obeyed with shaking fingers, pulling out a card decorated with colorful musical notes from the envelope. The little girl frowned, trying to read the words that were still complicated for her since she was barely in 2nd grade. "What does it say?" she asked, looking at Michael impatiently. Michael read it out loud. Chicago Harmony Music Academy welcomes you to your singing lessons every Tuesday and Thursday from 4 to 5 in the afternoon. It took Sophie a second to process the information before exploding in a scream of joy so powerful that the neighbors probably heard it. Emily came running out of the kitchen, drying her hands on her apron, alarmed by the scream, but she stopped dead when she saw her daughter hugging Michael so tight it looked like she would never let him go. "What happened? What's wrong?" asked Emily, with her heart racing, fearing something bad had happened. Sophie pulled away from Michael just enough to scream excitedly, "Mommy, I'm going to have singing lessons. I'm going to learn to sing for real." She held up the card like it was a trophy won in a world championship. Emily felt the tears instantly welling up in her eyes. Those tears of gratitude mixed with disbelief that had become so common since Michael entered their lives. She walked slowly toward Michael, who had stood up and was looking at her with a shy, almost embarrassed smile, as if he had done something too big but didn't know how to handle the emotional reaction it caused. "You didn't have to do this," Emily whispered with a cracked voice, though both knew she was protesting out of politeness, not true objection. Michael shook his head gently. "Yes, I did. Every child deserves to chase their dreams, and if I can make that happen, there's nothing in the world that would make me happier." Sophie was hopping around him like an excited bunny, already imagining herself on a giant stage singing in front of thousands of people. The following months were pure happiness for everyone. Sophie attended her singing lessons religiously. She arrived home singing scales and practicing songs that her teacher Miss Lucy taught her with patience and dedication. Her voice, naturally sweet and in tune, improved with every passing week, and soon the little girl became the star of the small academy. Michael never missed a performance. He was there in the front row during school recitals, recording videos that he would later watch proudly in his office when he needed a reminder of why he worked so hard. Emily bloomed too in ways she herself didn't expect. She got the sparkle back in her eyes and gained a few pounds she needed because she was finally eating 3 times a day without guilt. She started smiling more easily and trusting that good things could last. The relationship between her and Michael evolved from employee and boss into something much deeper. They became genuine friends, confidants, partners in life who supported each other without needing words. Michael began sharing his business concerns with Emily during dinner, and she would listen with genuine attention, offering simple but wise perspectives that sometimes gave Michael a clarity he couldn't find in his corporate boardrooms. Emily, for her part, started opening up about her own fears and hopes, about how she still had nightmares of losing everything again, about how sometimes she couldn't believe this new life was real. One Tuesday afternoon, Michael left the office early to pick up Sophie from her singing class, something he had started doing more and more often because he enjoyed those 20 minutes on the road where the little girl told him everything about what she had learned that day about her classmates, about the songs she dreamed of singing one day. He was driving down Michigan Avenue with the window slightly cracked, letting the fresh afternoon air into the SUV while listening to the news on the radio. The traffic was moderate for a Tuesday, and Michael relaxed in his seat, thinking he might take Sophie for ice cream before heading home, surprising her with that little treat she enjoyed so much. He didn't see the SUV that ran the red light at the next intersection. He only felt the brutal impact from the driver's side, the deafening sound of metal twisting, the blast of glass exploding into millions of shining fragments, and then nothing. Michael's SUV ended up overturned in the middle of the street with the hood completely destroyed and the driver unconscious, hanging from his seatbelt, while people ran to help, screaming for someone to call an ambulance. The SUV driver, pale and trembling, repeated over and over, "I didn't see him. I swear, I didn't see him. My God, please let him be alive." Sirens began to wail in the distance, and at the music academy Sophie waited, sitting on the bench at the entrance, wondering why Mr. Michael was taking so long to arrive. Her teacher Lucy tried to reach the emergency number she had on file, which was Michael's cell phone, but no one answered because that phone was smashed somewhere inside the wreckage of the SUV. After 30 minutes of waiting, she decided to call the second emergency contact. Emily. "Mrs. Emily, this is Lucy, Sophie's singing teacher. I apologize for bothering you, but the girl is still here at the academy and no one has come to pick her up. Mr. Michael is always very punctual, and I'm starting to get worried." Emily felt a chill run down her spine, that maternal instinct that knows when something is terribly wrong even before having concrete evidence. "I'm heading there immediately," she replied with a tense voice, hanging up before the teacher could add anything else. She took off her apron, grabbed her purse and the keys to the small car Michael had bought so she could move around with independence, and left the house with her heart galloping in her chest. She drove as fast as traffic allowed, praying out loud, "My God, protect him. Please protect him. Don't let anything bad happen to him." When she arrived at the academy and saw Sophie sitting on the bench with a sad little face, she hugged her tightly and said, "We're going to go find Michael, my love. Everything is going to be okay." But her voice trembled because she wasn't sure she believed her own words. They started searching by calling hospitals, and on the third attempt a receptionist confirmed what Emily feared most. "Yes, we have a Michael Thompson. He was admitted 2 hours ago due to a serious car accident." And Emily's world stopped in that instant. Emily drove to the hospital with Sophie in the back seat, crying and scared both of them, praying every prayer they knew, begging God for Michael to be okay. When they arrived at the ER and Emily asked for him, the duty nurse led them to a waiting room where a doctor in a white coat approached with a serious expression that promised no good news. "Family of Mr. Thompson?" the doctor asked, checking his clipboard. Emily hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering with a firm voice. "I am his family." The doctor nodded without questioning. "Mr. Thompson suffered severe traumatic brain injury, multiple rib fractures, and internal bleeding that we had to control in emergency surgery. He is stable for now, but he is in a medically induced coma. We cannot predict when he will wake up. The next 72 hours are critical." Emily felt the floor opening up beneath her feet, but she couldn't crumble not in front of Sophie, who was looking at her searching for strength. The doctor led them to intensive care where Michael lay connected to machines that beeped, monitoring every beat of his heart. Seeing Michael like that, so vulnerable, covered in bandages and tubes, felt like a punch to the soul. Emily gently took his hand and whispered, "Michael, you have to wake up. You have to come back to us." That night they slept in the waiting room chairs, hugging each other tight because neither wanted to leave his side. The next few days were pure torture, just waiting. Emily practically lived at the hospital, spending hours next to Michael talking to him, even though he couldn't answer, telling him about Sophie, the flowers in the garden, anything to keep that connection alive. The doctors said that patients in a coma can sometimes hear you, and Emily clung to that possibility like a drowning person clutching at driftwood. One night, when visiting hours were over but the nurses looked the other way, moved by her devotion, she sat next to Michael, holding his hand, and finally let out everything she'd been holding back for months. "Michael, there's something I need to tell you," she started, her voice shaking, looking at that face she'd learned to love without even realizing when it happened. "I know you probably don't feel the same way. I know to you we're just your employee and her daughter, but I need to say this just in case." Her voice cracked. "I love you, Michael. I fell in love with you without meaning to, without looking for it. I fell for your kindness, for how you look at my daughter like she's your own, for how you make me feel worthy when my whole life I've been made to feel insignificant." She didn't know that under his closed eyelids Michael could hear every word trapped in the darkness, but aware of everything fighting to open his eyes to move even just a finger. "I love you, and I'm going to love you for the rest of my life, because you gave me back my faith in humanity." She kissed his hand with infinite tenderness and fell asleep, resting against the edge of the bed. 5 more days of silent agony passed, and then on the morning of the 6th day, Michael opened his eyes. Recovery was slow. Michael spent 2 more weeks in the hospital before being discharged with orders for absolute rest. Emily drove him home with extreme care, and the whole way Michael watched her in silence with an expression she couldn't quite figure out. Sophie was waiting for them at the door with a giant sign. "Welcome home." The next few days were full of constant care. Emily cooked nutritious meals, managed his meds, and went with him on short walks around the garden. One afternoon, while Sophie was at school, Michael called Emily to his room, his voice serious. "Emily, I need to talk to you about something important," he said from his bed. Emily felt her heart race mentally, bracing herself for him to say her confession had ruined everything. She sat in the chair, hands clasped tight in her lap. "What is it?" she asked in a small voice. Michael looked at her intensely. "I heard everything you said that night at the hospital." Emily felt all the blood drain from her face, but Michael raised a hand to stop her. "Let me speak first. When I was in that coma, your voice was the only thing that kept me fighting to come back. And when you told me you loved me, I felt like someone truly needed me, that my life mattered beyond just my business deals. I fell in love with you too, Emily. Somewhere along the way, you stopped being my employee and became the most important person in my life, and I don't want to let another day go by without you knowing that." Michael reached his hand out to Emily, and she took it with trembling fingers, unable to believe what she was hearing. "Emily Davis!" Michael said, his voice firm and clear. "Would you do me the honor of marrying me?" He pulled a small blue velvet box from under his pillow, revealing a simple but beautiful ring sparkling in the window light. Emily was sobbing uncontrollably, nodding over and over again while tears of happiness flooded her face. "Is that a yes?" Michael asked with a smile that lit up his face. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes," Emily managed to say, and Michael slid the ring onto her finger with shaking hands. They hugged, careful not to hurt his wounds, two broken souls who had found healing in each other's love. Just then, the door burst open and Sophie ran in, stopping dead in her tracks when she saw her mother crying. "What's wrong? Are we leaving? Do we have to go?" she asked, panic in her voice, eyes filling with tears because that was her biggest fear, losing this home, losing this life, losing Michael. Michael held out his arm to Sophie, inviting her over, and when the little girl ran to them, he hugged her along with Emily, forming a perfect circle of love. "No, my love," said Michael, looking Sophie right in the eyes with all the sincerity in the world. "You're not leaving. You two are staying forever." The following months were pure joy. They got married in an intimate ceremony in the house garden with a few of Michael's close friends, and the neighbors from Emily's old neighborhood, who cried tears of joy seeing her look so radiant in her white dress, simple yet elegant. Sophie was the most enthusiastic maid of honor in the world, singing a song she had prepared especially for the occasion with the help of her teacher Lucy. And there wasn't a single dry eye when her sweet voice filled the garden with the words, "Thank you, God, for giving me a family, for bringing the angel who saved us, for turning our tears into smiles, for proving that love really does exist." Michael legally adopted Sophie, and the little girl began calling him Dad, naturally, as if it had always been that way. Emily blossomed in ways she never imagined possible. She went back to school, finished her high school diploma at night, and started taking management courses because she wanted to understand Michael's businesses better and truly support him. Michael learned that true wealth wasn't in his bank account, but in the laughter that filled his home, in the goodnight kisses from his wife, in the drawings Sophie kept making for him, and which he proudly framed in his office. And while the three of them stood hugging in their home full of light and hope, Michael thought of his mother, of Mr. Albert, of how just a random afternoon in a park in Chicago had changed 3 lives forever. How a simple gesture of kindness had blossomed into true love. And he knew with absolute certainty that his mother would be proud of him, that Mr. Albert would be smiling from wherever he was because he had kept his promise in the most beautiful way possible. He had found his own redemption and his own family in the process. And every night before sleeping, they thanked God together for finding each other, for saving each other, for making them a family. As time passed, they celebrated American holidays with new traditions like hosting backyard barbecues for 4th of July, complete with fireworks and apple pie, creating memories that strengthened their bond even more. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more stories that will remind you that true love and kindness still exist in this world. Share this video with someone. This story teaches us that sometimes angels don't have wings. They have hands willing to help hearts open to love, and eyes that see beyond appearances to recognize the true value of people. Michael, Emily, and Sophie remind us that it is never too late to change a life, that a gesture of kindness can create ripples that transform the world, and that families aren't just formed by blood, but by love, commitment, and brave decisions. When you see someone fighting in silence, when you find someone washing away their pain in the public fountain of life, remember this story and dare to be that miracle someone is waiting for. May God bless your life and make you an instrument of His love to transform the hearts of those who need it most. May you never lack the sensitivity to see the pain of others, nor the courage to heal it. And may you always remember that true wealth is measured by how much love we share, not by how much money we accumulate. Amen.